So, folks, we have to talk about how the Supreme Court is haunted by the specter of the Civil War. And what I mean by that is that a number of the justices on the Supreme Court are actively working to do their damnedest to undermine basically every major legislative advance that we've had and judicial advance that we've had since the Civil War. When a lot of conservatives would say the South will rise again, I didn't quite think they meant in like the judicial sense where like the Supreme Court of the United States would take up that cause. But that's kind of where we're at, unfortunately. And I think it is worth noting here that we're in a truly unprecedented time of regression when it comes to the courts. Specifically, we had June 23rd, which was about a week ago. The Supreme Court handed down a number of just truly awful decisions. And we're going to talk about some of them. And we're going to talk about the ones that got handed down today as well. But in this particular piece, from LawDork, by the way, lawdork.com, great source for SCOTUS news. Basically, the court sided with multinational corporations to basically say that the courts can't authorize lawsuits for even, quote, heinous and inhumane acts, unquote, contrary to international law. And this was specifically protecting the company Cisco from being sued for creating surveillance systems for use by China's authoritarian government. And yeah, apparently that's totally fine, according to the Supreme Court of the United States. And on top of that, you then had a win for ExxonMobil, specifically saying that it can, you can sue other companies internationally for supposed damages incurred here on your business. So they're going to be suing some Cuban companies soon. But then you ran into a couple other things that are truly awful. Specifically, they ruled that it is now not impossible, but getting close to impossible to sue individuals for for liabilities that they did not agree to. So what exactly that looks like is that there is a prison, right? Specifically the Louisiana prison system. There are several prisons within that system that have been subjected to lawsuits. And in this particular case, those lawsuits also brought certain individuals at those prisons into the suit to sue them as well for damages. And the Supreme Court ruled that actually, because those individuals did not agree to be sued when they accepted their jobs at the prisons, they can't be sued by people who were damaged by the prison system, which is insane, right? Like abusing your power over inmates in the prison system. No, you can't be sued individually because you didn't agree when you became a prison guard to being sued. That's crazy. That is the crazy situation we're being put forward now. So the point of suing is worthless? I mean, I guess, unless you've taken a job where, for whatever reason, your company has agreed to incur liability onto you. It's very, very weird. Now, this was specifically under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which was passed underneath the spending clause, and that basically, I'm going to quote here, its obligations are a requirement to receive certain federal funding, and as such, the court held that RLUIPA lawsuits are only allowed where the party consented to suit. So basically, if you want to sue someone specifically for this particular law, the person you're suing has to have agreed to have that legal liability for whatever reason they would ever do that. It's truly insane. But then we get to the one that really hurt last week, which is specifically this case, which is Blanche versus Muk Choi Lau, right? Now, this particular case centers on an individual who previously committed a crime in the United States, relatively minor one. He has a green card. He left the country, and then he came back and was detained. And so this lawsuit effectively is about the treatment of green card holders. And I'm going to read here directly from Justice Jackson's her dissent on this case. An LPR, which is a green card holder. First of all, an LPR who is classified as seeking admission may be immediately detained or paroled. The downside of detention are obvious. Downsides of detention are obvious. But even when a green card holder is paroled and thus allowed to enter the United States without being admitted, see section serious negative repercussions flow from the green card holders being deemed to be seeking admission. The facts of this case exemplify this. When Lau was paroled as a green card holder seeking an admission, border officers confiscated his I-551, his permanent green card. In its stead, they issued him an I-94 arrival/departure card bearing only handwritten information and a stapled photograph, and offering no indication of his green card status other than a barely legible stamp and the form code I-551 scribbled on an empty side of the card. See Appendix 6. That piece of paper has been Lau's only proof of his green card status for the past 14 years, while Lau remained in immigration limbo following the government's decision to classify him as seeking an admission at the border. So, essentially, what this does, and what the Supreme Court's decision on this does, is that in the cases of someone who has a green card committing what is called an act of moral turpitude, which is an outdated term, and here is actually a good way to talk about it, right? Deny crime involving moral turpitude. There are many possible challenges to federal government charges that an individual is deportable or otherwise disadvantaged under the immigration laws based on past conviction of a crime involving moral turpitude, CIMT. Possible challenges, some of which call for strict application of the categorical approach, include the following. CIMT definitional arguments. The BIA has stated that moral turpitude refers generally to conduct which is inherently base, vile, or depraved, and contrary to the accepted rules of morality and the duties owed between persons or to society in general. For an offense to be deemed a CIMT, the conduct prohibited must be per se morally reprehensible and intrinsically wrong, or malum in se, so it is the nature of the act itself and not the statutory prohibition of it which renders a crime one of moral turpitude. Escaping from prison does not necessarily involve the element of baseness, vileness, or depravity, which has been regarded as necessarily inherent in the concept of moral turpitude. An offense is not the CIMT if it does not involve sufficient intent as well as vile and depraved conduct. What does that mean, right? What does that mean? It means the problem with this has always been its vagueness. Because what one might deem vile and depraved towards another individual or society in general might vary from one to one, right? What we have here is a situation where effectively, if somebody has a crime on their record and they have a green card and they leave the country and then attempt to come back, that means that the Border Patrol agents who see them can confiscate their green card and then say, we believe you may have committed a crime of moral turpitude with this past conviction, and we are now deeming you as seeking admission. This is effectively a way that could very easily be weaponized in order to effectively revoke people's green card status. It's a way to just yoink someone's rights away. And it is truly awful. Truly, truly awful. In order to show this, it doesn't need to be proved in a court of law. Okay, that has to be unconstitutional? Yeah, but the Supreme Court said it is constitutional, so we can all kick rocks. Right? It's legally trapping someone? Yeah. And so when we look at this situation, I mean, Justice Jackson says, quote, "I worry that the court has now handed the government a massive blank check." Because what this does is leave it completely up to the discretion of Border Patrol officers, because they don't need to prove it in that moment. They don't need to prove that, and instead the burden is placed upon the person who is being stripped of their green card to prove their status and prove their crime that was allegedly of moral turpitude wasn't of moral turpitude. So then you go into the immigration court system, and that's where they have to argue their case. And that is where you have the Trump administration cleaning house in order to insert just about any conservative who wants to be an immigration court judge directly into that system. It is truly grotesque. Now, when it comes to these crimes of moral turpitude, as Aaron Reichlin-Melnick explains here, why does this matter? Because certain criminality-based grounds of deportation apply differently to those seeking admission versus deportation. Here, one conviction for a crime involving moral turpitude is grounds for removal. Had Loud not left, he could only be deported after 2 convictions for crimes deemed of moral turpitude. Meaning that, effectively, if you have a green card and you leave the country after having committed 1 crime of moral turpitude, that can be enough to prevent you from being back in the country as a green card holder. It's deeply fucked up. It's deeply, deeply fucked up. In the case of Mr. Lau, who brought this case to the Supreme Court, what was his deeply vile and depraved behavior towards society and other individuals? What was his previous conviction, you might ask? It was selling counterfeit clothing. That was the depraved action that he took that Border Patrol deemed, a crime of moral turpitude. Be so fucking for real. I am being so fucking for real. It's grotesque. It is absolutely grotesque. However, this is not the only case, right? Because also worth noting that on June 25th, another devastating case was dropped by the Supreme Court. This one specifically allowing Donald Trump, as President of the United States, to strip temporary protected status from asylum seekers. And it's truly apocalyptic, right? So this came in the form of Mullen versus Doe, which basically was overturned a decision blocking the end of temporary protected status for 350,000 Haitians and 4,000 Syrians.
This just reminds me of the HOK Sang Lao injustice at sea.
I do not know what that is. I don't get the reference. I'm sorry. The other case is Mullen versus Al Otro Lado, which basically is the Supreme Court upholding the ability of Border Patrol officials to deny physical entry into the United States in order to claim asylum. So it sets up a situation where if somebody wants to claim asylum, the legal way of declaring asylum is to come into the United States and declare asylum, right? That is the legal process for declaring asylum. You need to enter it. This decision allows Border Patrol agents to deny someone coming into the United States in order to claim asylum. So basically, the Supreme Court's like, well, if they're not on U.S. soil, then they can't claim asylum. So it's totally fine to not let them be on U.S. soil it's like almost a childish level of just jurisprudence. It's truly bafflingly bad. Now let's take a look at Mullen versus Doe, right? This is from the American Immigration Council. Oh, yes. Overton reference. Sorry, Sake Tanuki, was not on that level. When the Trump administration terminated TPS for Haiti, Syria, and other countries, courts determined that the administration failed to abide by required procedures established by Congress. Under those procedures, TPS should only be terminated if an interagency review determines that conditions in the country have improved. Documents uncovered during the Haitian TPS case revealed the Trump administration failed to follow required legal procedures and ignored ongoing dangers in Haiti. Despite this, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that a provision of the TPS statute limiting lawsuits challenging TPS determinations prevented courts from hearing any lawsuits challenging the Department of Homeland Security's secretary's failure to follow the required legal procedures. In addition, the majority opinion declared that President Trump's repeated public denigration of Haiti and Haitians did not rise to the level of unconstitutional racial animus that would permit a court to set aside the TPS decision. Crucially, the court did not rule whether former DHS Secretary Kristi Noem had gone through the required procedures set out by law. Rather, the court said that questions of whether the DHS Secretary followed the law cannot be heard by courts in the first place, meaning that in the future, even an openly unlawful decision to grant or terminate TPS could be entirely insulated from judicial review. Yeah, basically, again, just saying, hey, we're not even going to allow a lawsuit questioning the legality of these decisions to move forward. You actually cannot do that. And what that effectively does is sidestep any of the controls of Congress and allow the Trump administration to proceed unilaterally with ending
jurist
TPS.
Imprudence.
Also, anime sidekick gal, true. Jurist imprudence, indeed.
WTF your white honkas.
Honka S? Matatiahu, thank you for gifting Sake Tanuki a sub. And Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. Appreciate y'all. So, I guess the president of the United States claiming that Haitians are eating cats and dogs and are generally criminals does not rise to the level of racial animus to question this TPS decision. It's truly like I mean this is some apocalyptic stuff. This affects like over 1 million people. You know? There are 1.3 million people with TPS status in the United States. And this effectively means that their presence in the United States is at the whim of one man. And that fucking sucks. And not only that, it is quite possibly going to doom entire cities and towns across America that have come to rely upon these workers.
Jesus, I am gonna drink after work, and I don't even like alcohol.
Yeah, understandable, Nathan. Thank you for the $5 dono. Here's this article in the New York Times today. The Ohio city revived by Haitian immigrants sees an uncertain future. In Springfield, Ohio, some residents see the end of the economic boom after the end of a humanitarian program for immigrants. Others see still darker possibilities. Let's see. The court's decision threatens to transform Springfield into ground zero for what some legal scholars are calling the first mass de-documentation of immigrants in modern American history. The city of 60,000, including more than 10,000 Haitians, could become the target of a major enforcement operation. Because, of course, once this is stripped, there's still the question of how do you remove hundreds of thousands of these people from the country? And, of course, the answer is with the militarized. You send them. They descend upon cities and towns like fucking locusts, snatching people. In the case of Springfield, that's like 1/6 of the entire city. American residents are preparing to protect Haitians, with some making plans to care for their Haitian neighbors' native-born children, and even to hide and shelter immigrants who remain. Because keep in mind, the native-born children aren't deported with their parents. So you're shattering countless families with this as well. It's disgusting on every conceivable level of humanity. The Supreme Court decision is not just a tragedy for Haitians, it's a tragedy for Springfield, Ohio, said Carl Ruby, pastor at Central Christian Church. We went from being one of the fastest shrinking cities to one of the fastest growing cities in America. This undoes all that progress. If the Haitians had to leave Springfield, it would be devastating, said the rising senior high schooler. Skill, morale, and friends would be gone. It is going to launch a cavalcade of misfortune and terrible shit. Because also keep in mind, a lot of these TPS workers became nurses for the elderly. A lot of the at-home nurses in America and across America are made up of refugees and people who came here on TPS. So a lot of the workforce, which is already understaffed for the elderly, is made up of these immigrants. And what happens when there just aren't enough workers to keep those nursing homes open? A lot of people are going to suffer, both domestically and, domestically for sure. Whether they are American citizens or here under TPS. It is going to cause untold amounts of suffering. And it's like, I gotta be honest, I can't really put into words here that this is not the power that should be granted to one man. And more than that, this is a power explicitly granted by Congress. There should be here deference to Congress.
Wait, really are immigrants going straight to work at nursing homes? I didn't know about that.
Yeah, a huge portion of the people who care for children and who care for the elderly are immigrants. Yeah, according to KFF, around 21 to 28% of the workforce in nursing homes are immigrants. And similarly for childcare as well. So, just as an FYI, it's going to be bad all over. Now, I do want to say there is a little bit of a positive news coming down today, specifically related to voting. Because really, and I was deeply concerned about this, because voting is basically one of the last mechanisms we have left in order to try to make things right, in order to elect people who are willing to do what it takes for us to set the courts right, for us to set Congress right, and for us to set the presidency right. And what is very much required now is for that voting mechanism to remain intact, right? It's why it's so important that the SAVE Act doesn't get passed. It's why it's so important that we protect things like mail-in voting. And in one of the biggest surprises of the day, the Supreme Court voted to protect mail-in voting. And that, I have to say, was a bit shocking. Though not as shocking as it might appear at first blush. Basically, the Trump administration has been, for a while now, and I've talked about this on the show, been trying to kill the idea of mail-in voting, or to link the ability to accept mail-in ballots to giving over voter data from the state to the federal government. And for a whole myriad host of ideas, that is a terrible, terrible idea, to give up voter info to the federal government. Specifically, this federal government in particular. The states that were approached in this way said no, took the federal administration to court, and said the courts have now sided with the states who refused to give up their voting records. And mail-in balloting for today is protected. So that is the one silver lining from today. Yeah, because a lot of people rely on mail-in balloting in order to be able to vote at all. Whether they have disabilities, or if they are elderly, or if they just are busy with life and work and children and whatnot. Like, did they keep mail-in because so many elderly people rely on it? That might have been a part of it, but my assumption here is that the John Roberts Court in particular, the conservatives are very interested in maintaining the veneer of legitimacy for the court. So basically, their position and argument is that the court needs to be perceived by the public as legitimate, because if they lose the legitimacy in the eyes of the public, that's when like people start taking revolutionary action, right? So they view it, and John Roberts views this as true, that if they just, you guys get one, Trump gets like 3, but you guys still got one, so like it's totally okay. That's how they think about it. So they think this makes them look reasonable, which is a move that they typically do to then still cede more government power to Donald Trump. I have an Overton window question, but I don't want to interrupt the current topic. It's worth asking right now because we're kind of talking about a sort of Overton window just as it relates to the legitimacy of the Supreme Court of the United States. So if you have a question, now would be a great time to ask it. I'm not particularly surprised by it, but like after so many bad developments from the courts, I do have to admit I did think that this one might happen, The mail ballot was Roberts and Barrett, who both seem to especially like trying to maintain the line versus some of the more extreme conservative justices. Yeah, I mean, their Overton window has shifted because they're like, well, we're the reasonable ones here, tee-hee. Look at Alito over there being crazy. So when I look, where is the Overton window now? It seems left side, but how is that possible when the right has all the power? Because the right only has the institutional power. The left has the actual people power. And the people power in our system, so long as our mechanisms remain functional, the people power is where the actual power in our society lies. And truly, the people power has always been where all power in society lies. And so when you look at where the Overton window is right now and what is possible right now, it has been pushed further left by people like you and people like me and people like everyone here in these chats working together on a local level, on a national level, on a state level to broaden the window of what is possible, to be loud and angry about it and to move, right? And so what has happened is that the conservatives in the institutions do have a lot of institutional power and are succeeding in degrading a number of different rights and values and institutions in a myriad of different ways. But while that damage has been done, a lot of people, the majority of people in this country have been working very hard and working overdrive to channel their rage and their dissatisfaction into something productive. And that is on the ground organizing that allows the largest events, the largest protests in American history to happen. Those have happened over the last year, and it seems insane, but because the media doesn't really talk about it all that much, but we have had the largest protests in the country's history over the past year, all against Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And specifically what happens when you have folks on the left organizing is that those events become
honest
radicalizing
question, and
for
I am
liberals
only
too.
asking because this feels hopeless, but is there such a thing as a good Republican? Can we even talk to them from child marriage to racism to fascism? I am so tired.
I mean, I think that there are people who are Republicans out of ignorance, who inherited their parents' politics and don't really know much about, why they believe what they believe. And I think that those people can be reached, provided they have an open mind, right?
Donald Duck's Supreme Court, fine, you get one loaf of moldy bread. Now stop talking about our Lord and Savior's soup brain, bread emoji.
Indeed. Exactly. You got it. 2D Synctium, thank you for the $5 super chat. Have we heard anything about birthright citizenship at the Supreme Court? No, that is going to be coming. That's one that a lot of people are really worried about. And I will say that I do think that the Supreme Court is going to side with birthright citizenship ultimately. But I only think that because today we also had one of the worst decisions dropped. Specifically, we had the case, the Slaughter case. That's what it was called. So in Slaughter, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that effectively says Donald Trump is the executive. He has the ability to essentially get rid of the head of any federal agency. He can fire anyone without cause. And instead, he can, like it used to be, with the language that Congress included in the laws and the language that was upheld and cited by the Supreme Court in the past, over the last almost century, that you had to show cause for terminating the head of a federal agency. And with Slaughter, the current Supreme Court says, lol, no you don't. And it's set up a situation that is, frankly, insane, right? Specifically, I'm going to quote here from this here. On her view, Congress could commandeer the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, most, if not all, of the Department of Justice, and a number of other agencies besides. Indeed, if Slaughter were correct, then it is not clear why Congress would need to allow the president any say in firings at all. And this is from the ruling, right? And what is insane about this is that, yes, the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the right to do all of those things. Like, Congress has, like, if Congress passed a law to basically move all of those departments that are currently under the executive under the purview of Congress specifically, or to appoint courts that could then appoint specifically only had the job of appointing people to the heads of these agencies, Congress could do that. Congress could, in fact, do all of those things. But the fact that you have effectively the Supreme Court saying, no, they can't. But, like, I gotta be honest, I gotta quote Andy Craig on this one, right? The Constitution explicitly gives Congress the power to say all inferior officers can be, if Congress wants, appointed by the courts, not by the president or even by presidentially appointed principal officers. That's been used very sparingly, but the option existing shows how absurd this theory is, which is correct, right? Like, this is an insane position. And that's true, Ninja Not 9000. It does make it easier for, if Democrats win the presidency, to basically just do whatever the fuck the president wants, But honestly, what we are now getting into is, how do we unfuck these courts? Like, how do we actually do it? And to continue quoting this here, Andy Craig, very good on law and policy. It'd be awkward, which is why Congress hasn't done it. But they could create an Article 3 court for the sole purpose of appointing executive officers and give the court the power to appoint 99.9% of the executive branch, president cut out entirely. That's a plain text power that they have. And even if you insist the president still has the power to fire them, that produces an absurd infinite loop that they can be immediately reappointed by the same process. This is not at all sensible for the Supreme Court to do. What is required from here on out? What is required is, like, drastic political action. We need court reform beyond just, we'll add a few more liberal members to the court. Like, I think that there needs to be, like, some kind of nullification. If Congress has the ability to just create courts to oversee the judiciary or to oversee the federal branch, then let them create a court to oversee nullification of different Supreme Court decisions. Like, create some absolutely specific bullshit mechanism that can be deployed for approximately the term of the next, presidency. Have 4 years for this, like, complete bullshit nullification court to go through all of the decisions from the Roberts Court one by one and nullify the decisions that are clearly at odds with established constitutional law. And I think that if we did that, and we had an expiration date, and it actually, like, we could go through, nullify these decisions, and then dissolve that court, I think that that would absolutely be something worth looking into. And I know that that sounds insane, but we're kind of in a territory where the Supreme Court of the United States is haunted by the ghost of the Confederacy, and we need to do extreme things in order to exorcise that demon/ghost, right? That's what needs to happen. They need to create the Supremer Court, exactly. We'll call them the Supremes. In order to keep their judge positions, they'll have to, perform songs and dances. All of this to say is that when we're looking at presidents and people who are running for Congress in 2026 and 2028, we need to be looking at people who are specifically talking about how they would reform the Supreme Court. We've gotten to a point where even Pete Buttigieg, one of the most milquetoast men planning to run for president in 2028, is talking about Supreme Court reform. But we need to go further than even he's thinking, because this country has been absolutely disgusted. Absolutely disgusting. And it's getting worse, right? Specifically, the Fed is working alongside, the Supreme Court and other courts in order to prosecute and go after political groups. This is all related to NSPM 7, which was talked about back in March. But basically anyone who's considered Antifa or might be considered anti-Christian or anti-capitalist or anti-American can now be targeted specifically by prosecutors and members of the Department of Justice who have in the past gone after gangs and terrorists to silence dissent. So, hey, hopefully y'all don't show up at my house. All right? Now, that being said, I will say, in a positive development, ICE is trying to sell 7 of the warehouses that they bought to try and turn into concentration camps, because it turns out really bad idea and people don't like it. And this is the power of locals getting involved to oppose these ICE detention centers, because you can actually stop them from being built because they're trying to sell them now. And fuck them, I will, just to end on this note, the Supreme Court knows that they are deeply unpopular. And I want to note that because I saw this article going around, and honestly, this sounded fucking insane. So, of course, I had to check it out. The Supreme Court is building its own massive police force, which, that sounds like they know that they're very unpopular. That sounds like a negative development.
The Great American Fair is amazing. There are like tens of people there. Party face emoji, party face emoji, party face emoji, eagle emoji, eagle emoji, eagle emoji.
Wow, whole tens of people? Starch Manning, thank you for the $5 super chat. To police what? Themselves? Well, let's take a look at their website. Because they have a website and like an ad campaign for some reason. Here, let's reload it so we can get the...
Know that the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest court in the land. That it's located in our nation's capital. And that its origins go back to the Constitution. But do you know what it takes to keep it safe and secure? You may know that 9 justices sit on the court, that they serve life terms, and their decisions impact us all. But do you know whose job it is to protect them? We are the Supreme Court Police. And we're a proud, dedicated, and talented team you may not know a whole lot about. Like the fact that we're charged with protecting the justices, employees, and visitors to the Supreme Court building, as well as its grounds. Or that we're more than 200 sworn officers and growing, with wide-ranging duties, responsibilities, and roles. Or that the benefits we receive reflect the importance of our mission. Now that you know a little more about us, we'd like to hear a bit about you. Are you disciplined, dedicated, and of high moral character? Do you have talents and abilities that could benefit from specialized training? Are you in search of a career that gives purpose and meaning to your life? If that sounds like you, Then let's continue this conversation. Because the Supreme Court Police is now hiring qualified candidates to grow our team and expand our capabilities. You don't have to have all the answers to join. What you must have is the attitude, integrity, and drive to learn. The only thing more impressive than these hallowed halls are the people and principles it takes to protect them. The Supreme Court Police, the highest court, a higher calling. Apply now at scuspd.gov/join.
Yeah, so they're trying to recruit people to, walk around with guns outside the Supreme Court. And also paying a lot of money for people to do it. Like, Jesus Christ. You want to make 6 digits? 6 figures? Just be an entry-level police officer. So you can gun down the hordes of, like, deeply, deeply angry folks when the Supreme Court, declares us to be living in a dictatorship or some shit.
What's our clearance, Clarence? Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor?
And don't call me Shirley, Sake. Thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. Man, this all sucks. Like, this just all sucks. Like, every bit of this sucks. I'm mad about it in a way where I don't have helpful, like, political takes on this. Like, it's just bad. The Supreme Court is an unending torrent of terrible news every single time it drops cases. People who pay attention to this shit, and I am one of them, unfortunately, are so exhausted by the way the Supreme Court, like, draws out the drama of the different cases that they drop. We're all on pins and needles right now, waiting for the birthright citizenship case, and it sucks. It sucks waiting to see if people are just going to have human rights or if they aren't. And we don't know, because the people who are on this court are fucking ghouls. They're fucking ghouls who think that if you have different skin or different ancestry, you shouldn't be in this country. Frankly, again, I'm not joking when I say that this court is haunted by the spirit of the Civil War. It's haunted by the spirit of the Confederacy. It's fucking possessed, and it's disgusting. And when this is all done, we are going to have like a revolutionary attitude to what exactly the judicial branch and the topmost powers within the judicial branch should look like. And I think we all need to get real quick and ready to broaden our minds and open ourselves up to the different possibilities of what that could look like. Because frankly, it cannot look like how it looks right now. That is untenable, it is unacceptable, it's un-American, and it's undemocratic. And we need to begin embracing something that works for all of us, not just something that works for the whitest among us and the most, land-owning among us. All right? Because if this Supreme Court had their way, we'd be rolling it all the way back to only white men who own land can vote. And I fucking hate that. I hate it a lot. And you should too. So, with all that being said, if you got anything out of this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know what you think down in the comments, and also, organize, folks. It's all we've ever had, frankly. It's all any people have ever had. Organize, organize, organize. Join your local Dems, join your local DSA. If you need help, join our Discord, reach out to GamerG for help organizing your local DSA, reach out to Dragonfly for help organizing your local Dems. Get involved. Organize, 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 because it is of existential importance that we do. Check out ImogeneOlivia.com, gender euphoric lingerie designed from the ground up for trans femmes, also tested with cis men, cis women, non-binary folk. It is comfortable, sexy lingerie. And hey, you know what? When the Supreme Court sucks and your democracy is being systematically dismantled, might as well look and feel good in your lingerie.
Not sure if this is possible, but what would abolishing SCOTUS look like?
Well, then you just have the problem where you've created like one of the lower courts into the new version of SCOTUS, right? I think that there are other ways we can handle it. but there needs to be a mechanism at the top where it cuts off and there's like a final say on like judicial cases that can then have ramifications all the way down the court system. It doesn't have to look like SCOTUS, but I do think that there needs to be a mechanism at the top to just kind of have the final say. ImogeneOlivia.com, link down in the description. Let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, gaming, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord. Riverboat.